Hello, everyone. Welcome to another text encoding session. What we're going to do for this session is we're going to briefly discuss what we did for the first exercise on Markdown. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time discussing the second exercise that we've set for you on Recogito. And then finally, we'll finish off with a brief review of some further resources. I'll start with reviewing the first exercise. Interestingly, a lot of people who shared their work decided to encode the page of Pope's Dunciad in very different ways. I'll just share my screen. There are essentially two different, well, maybe three different methods of encoding a text like this. And for now, I've got a different page of Pope's Dunciad, but one that's quite similar to the page that we assigned. And the method here is essentially a quick transcription method. And the idea here is that you're trying to get the words transcribed as quickly as possible with the idea that you would eventually transform it in some other format down the line. So here you can see that we've just begun with...
Are you intending to be screen sharing, Christopher?
Yes, I am. Is it not working?
Not yet.
Oh, right, of course. This happened last time. Firefox won't let me share my screen. Yeah. Well, I'll try to discuss this as best as I can then. So essentially, what we have is, on the one hand, a quick transcription method where you're using simple Markdown syntax to transcribe text. And then we have another method which some of you decided to use, which was trying to replicate the printed page. And one thing that came up in the discussion was, to what extent should we be following the printed page? Some people who are more bibliographically oriented might want to do a lot of work to try to replicate that printed page. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. In fact, there are good reasons to do that. On the other hand, there are good reasons to ignore some of the aspects of the printed page at the same time. One of the reasons might be that you're simply trying to make a text of a page machine readable. And by transcribing and building some structure through Markdown, which is then rendered in HTML, you're giving it that structure. You're giving it. You're providing some machine readable text, and that's a very helpful thing, of course. And if you want to preserve some aspects of the printed page, it might just be as good to provide a facsimile image of the original printed page alongside your transcription of the text, and that way people can see what the original looked like. The difficulty with rendering any printed medium into a digital medium is that there's no one-to-one correspondence between the two. And there will be a certain amount of information loss, no matter how you choose to encode a text digitally. But also there's the fact that print technologies are themselves the product of pragmatic decisions, contingencies, and decisions that were relating simply to the business of printing pages. So some people brought up whether you should be encoding ligatures or digraphs or things like that, where two letter forms are essentially joined in a single piece of type. And the reason why those pieces of type were used was to avoid breaking two pieces of type when letters seem to physically have friction against each other. So that's just a printing convention. it's up to the editor whether that printing convention ought to be transformed into the digital sphere. But I shared a link in the GitHub issues forum that it might not be worth your time to spend a lot of energy putting in Unicode for ligatures, when in fact the important thing is for the computer to easily read the text strings that you're using for your transcription. And there are other ways that you can account for things such as ligatures by doing some additional encoding, particularly some semantic encoding. Those were very interesting comments, and we were really pleased to see the level of engagement with this particular text. Another.
Can I add
Sure.
a quick thought
Sure.
there, Christopher? One other thing that that will factor into this very heavily is the discipline and the subdiscipline that you're working in. So, if you're editing a text of Pope, the individual layout and the individual ligatures and those sorts of things are less likely to be significant, except in as much as some of those things were self-consciously archaizing or satirical in their intent. If you're, however, transcribing a notebook, that's very messy and has got lots of overwrite scoring or whatever, or if you're transcribing a piece of 2,000-year-old papyrus that's been inscribed, in a difficult language with difficult handwriting, then every clue that can help us to understand what's going on in that text might be relevant. And it might be that discipline really wants to capture every single ligature, every single damaged character, no matter how clear it is what character it was, every single idiosyncratic form of a character in that. And that's something that has always been attempted to be captured in print editions of these things.
Right.
So that will impact on your decision in quite a significant way.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And again, I think alongside that very good point, it's important to stress what the function of Markdown really is. And what Gabby's describing is something that you'll probably want to do as a next step if you find it necessary for your project. And that would be using some other kind of semantic markup. Some of you had questions about the functions of certain HTML tags within markup. And just to be clear, markup actually allows you to embed HTML within a markup document, and it will still render as HTML. And in fact, you can even embed HTML with CSS, cascading style sheets, stylistic information within a Markdown file, and that will also render. So those of you who are interested in indentation, for example, you could physically encode in a Markdown file a p tag with a style attribute indicating a text indent, whatever, 2M spaces. And again, in the issues, I've given an example of that. So Markdown is flexible enough where if you really feel the need to include some HTML instructions in your base file, authoring file, as it were, then you can do that. But I just said authoring, and authoring is very important to emphasize yet again, which is a lot of people use Markdown as a quick authoring tool for documentation in repositories like GitHub, but they also use it as a quick transcription tool. And that means that there's every expectation that that Markdown file will be transformed into something else a bit more sophisticated. And that's where we get into issues of semantic markup, which we don't cover in this workshop, but stay tuned because the School of Advanced Study provides other training in XML markup. But XML is where you would use angle brackets and tags similar to HTML, except you'd have greater semantic description capabilities and the flexibility to essentially use any tags that you see fit for your project. But there are additional guidelines called the Text Encoding Initiative guidelines that formalize and somewhat constrain the the XML vocabularies that are used to describe scholarly texts. So that's basically the next step in your journey of text encoding. But the idea of Markdown was to ease you into it, give you a sense of the very basic aspects of what markup actually is and how you can render it into something in a quicker fashion that might be used for web publication or for further semantic markup. Gabby, is there anything else that we should cover on this before moving on?
Nothing that springs to mind, but we may come back to some more things at the end.
Great. Okay.
So for this second session then, and for the second practical exercise we're giving you, we're moving on from the first exercise in which we use something called inline markup. So you had the text in front of you and you added the tags or the markup symbols directly in the text at the places where you wanted to make that annotation. In this session, we're going to use something that is sometimes referred to as standoff markup, where the annotation is outside the text and points into the text. Okay, so that's the difference is between if you're marking up a manuscript and you want to indicate something in the second word in line 3, you go to the second word of line 3 and you underline that that text in order to show that you're changing something. Whereas in standoff markup, you write someone a note and say, by the way, in the second word of line 3, I want this to change, without annotating the manuscript itself. Okay, so it's standoff because the markup is outside. The kind of annotation that we're using for this example is identification of named entities in the text, and it's doing this using a method known as, or a format known as linked open data, which is effectively a way of expressing semantic relationships within and between documents and other kinds of entities. So the most obvious kind is between web pages. You say this web page was authored by, and you point to the web page of the person who authored the page. Those sorts of statements. And in this case, we're using this to record, to disambiguate named entities that turn up in a text by saying, in line 7 of this text, the fourth word, which is the string LONDON, is a reference to this place, and you point to a gazetteer saying that it's over here, it's the capital of the United Kingdom, etc. Okay, and so that's the that's what we mean by disambiguating named entities in a text. The string LONDON could mean 100 different things. It could be a small town in Canada. It could be various other places. It could be people. I'm sure there are people with that name, etc. So we're disambiguating it both as a place name and as which particular place we're talking about. The technique we're using is it's a subset of something that's sometimes called named entity recognition, where we're using our own abilities, our eyes and our knowledge to scan through a text, and when we see something that we recognize as a named entity, so it's a string that refers to a place or to a person or to an event or to a building or to an item or a plant or any other kind of named entity, we can add an annotation that disambiguates that. Named entity recognition is a larger field that includes other methods and techniques as well. It's very often used to refer to computer driven or computer assisted named entity recognition, including natural language processing or text mining methods, which will go through a text and attempt to predict which strings of characters in that text are named entities. And one of the simplest ways of doing that is as a first pass, you find all words that are not the first word in a sentence that begin with a capital letter, and you say, okay, those are candidates for named entities, and then and then further passes are made on that, looking those strings up in dictionaries to see if they're normal words, looking them up in name lists, looking them up in place lists, gazetteers, atlases, and so forth, and also using learned algorithms to detect what place names and personal names look like, and potentially also looking at other words around it in the sentence. If it's the subject of a sentence that has a verb of action, then it's more likely to be a person than a place. If it's the object of a sentence that has a verb of movement towards or something, it's quite likely to be a place, and so forth. Those sorts of algorithms can be played, and obviously they get very, very complicated over time, and the accuracy rate of those sorts of things is by no means perfect at this point. I mention that because in the exercise we're going to look at both to some degree. First off, as before, we have given you two. Let me just share my screen just quickly. Yep, we've given you two. Here, two options for tutorials for working with this tool called Recogito that Christopher mentioned. This is an annotation tool specifically designed for annotating place entities in text, in historical texts, but can also be used to annotate other kinds of named entities in texts. And so we've given two tutorials. The first is a tutorial from the Synergies Digital Classics program, which is given by my colleague Valeria Vitale, who works for the Pelagius project, or worked for the Pelagius project at the time, and was responsible for training with the Recogito tool. And so this about 25 minutes of a longer video, starting about 55 minutes in, is the specific introduction to the Recogito tool. And the second is a slightly shorter Recogito tutorial, which is a wiki page with a bunch of explanations and documentation and a few video links in there, I think, but they're to shorter videos. So you could use either one or both of those tutorials as you prefer, as you think is most useful to you. And I should say, for the Synergies session, if you're particularly interested in geographic annotation in particular, you might want to watch the whole video. The first 55 minutes are an introduction to the concept of digital gazetteers. So these documents that record place names and place information in more detail, specifically with reference to historical places. So once you've followed one of those, one or more of those tutorials, and you have the reference materials in front of you, you've got a sense of how to use the Recogito tool. You'll need to create an account on Recogito. You will log into your account on Recogito, and we've created 3 documents in Recogito, and we're asking you to take one of those documents, and we've assigned groups. This is obviously only relevant to the November 2020 workshop, but we've assigned the 11 groups to the documents according to the indication on this page. With future workshops that use this same introduction, we may have different assignments, but so the first of these is an English translation of Book 1 of Xenophon's Anabasis. If you're not a classicist or a historian, you're not familiar with that text, it doesn't matter too much, but because it involves a military campaign and a journey from the Aegean through Asia Minor towards Persia, there are a lot of place names mentioned in this. So the first document is just that file with no annotations made to it yet, and we'll just ask you to go through and try and identify place names in that document, and if you can, disambiguate those place names. In some cases, you will find the spelling is not exactly the same as the spelling used in the gazetteer, so you might try to guess the different spelling. Some of them you'll be able to guess. You can say, okay, that name looks similar enough to a modern name that I recognize, but in other cases, it may not be clear. The second document is the same text. It's the first book of Xenophons and Abysses in English translation, but we have run an automated NER process on that for you. This is using the Stanford NLP, using the English language presets. And so this has gone through and attempted to identify place names and personal names and other kinds of names in this text. And as you go through, you will see that sometimes it's done well. It's correctly identified, Persepolis as a city and which Persepolis it is. But in other cases, it's got it wrong. It's identified something as a place when it's actually a person, or vice versa. Or it's identified something as a place in North America, which is unlikely in Xenophons and Abysses, etc. And so those you'll have to not only annotate things that it has missed, because it will have missed some, delete things that it is incorrectly annotated, but also correct some that it is annotated and identified as either the wrong kind of entity or the wrong particular entity in there. So it's possible that because they've annotated a lot of things for you, it will save a lot of time. It's also possible that because you have to check each one, it will waste a certain amount of time. So there's a bit of give and take there. The third document we've given is just for a bit of variety. It's an image file, and the tutorials will show you how to annotate image files in it as well as text documents of a modern redrawing of a medieval Arabic map of the world, which has in Latin transcription, but it has the place names as they are known to the medieval Arabic-speaking world. To annotate and disambiguate those places, you'll have to have a little bit of creativity in thinking, okay, if that's the Arabic spelling, what city might that be a reference to? So by the world, it really means Europe and the Mediterranean area, but you might want to pick an area of that map that you're familiar with. If, for example, you're familiar with historical Italy, pick the area of Italy and have a go at identifying place names in there, because you might be better able to guess the place names in there. I mean, if a place in there is called Roma, you might be able to guess that that's Rome, for example. So we've assigned those 3 documents to the various groups. Please do, everybody, look at all 3 documents and maybe make 1 or 2 annotations in all 3 documents just to get a sense of the differences between them, but focus in particular on your assigned document. We want as many annotations as possible in there. Because we're then going to take those annotations after the weekend and create a small visualization which will show the differences between the 3 documents and how their footprint on a contemporary map of Europe and the Mediterranean area will look. So that's the main part of the exercise. The follow-up part of the exercise then is, while still discussing this with the other people in your group, think about some of the other features that you might want to annotate in these documents. And these might include, personal names, events, other kinds of information that you can or might want to annotate. The tool won't do a search for you and find the URI of the entity that you're annotating in a gazetteer if it's not a place. It won't search, for example, in Wikipedia for looking for personal names for you. If you want to put in URIs of personal names or of other kinds of entities, you'll have to find them yourself and put them in free form in the text field. And so think about what sorts of thing would be useful to annotate, and have a go at annotating a few of those, again, in conversation with your group. There's an internal map visualization feature of the tool, which you can look at and see what features that highlights. And finally, we'd like you to go to the export or download button in Recogito, which you'll see in the tutorials, and you can export your annotations as a CSV, which is a comma-separated values format file, which you can then open in a spreadsheet tool. So you can open it in Excel, Google Spreadsheets, the Apple Sheets, or whatever LibreOffice spreadsheet tool, etc. And you'll be able to see there the tabular information that that has been recorded, and this, as I say, is standoff format, so it doesn't have the text with tags in it saying where the place names are. What it has instead is a list of the place names with then a reference saying where in the document that occurs, and see what information you can find, you can recognize in the table, in the different columns in that file, and yeah, just try and understand what's in there, and this can all be discussed on the forum if there's anything in there that you that you're trying to guess, or that you'd like some explanation of what's going on in there. So as before, we have two forums. One is for the discussion of any technical issues that arise with that exercise. If you have any difficulty logging in, if there's any problem with the functionality of the tool, if there's any issue with the sharing on any of the documents or anything like that. The second is the forum thread for discussing these discussion questions. And again, these questions are really to sort of get you started thinking about the issue of annotation, and particularly this sort of tags-free annotation that you can do in this tool. And so think about the questions, including things like the simplicity of using a tags-free interface, and it makes things easier, but does it hide something from you? Think about why you're doing these annotations. What do you want with them? What's the audience? What will you use them for? And how does that impact on the decisions you make for that? Think about how visualizing the data helps you to understand either the data or the process in some way. And think about the differences between the annotations that you make from the annotations that your colleagues in the other groups make, even if you discussed beforehand what you were going to do, and think about what that means. And is there a problem in the fact that that you end up doing different things despite the fact that you had the same agenda in the first instance? We'll think a bit about how how much the automated NER both helped and hindered the process of annotating the text, and we'll see that a bit in terms of scale as well. How many entities ended up being identified in the unannotated as opposed to the annotated documents, and think about what you wanted to do that Recogito didn't let you do. Okay, so and those are but any other question that comes up around the issues raised by annotating this sort of document is fair game. So to discuss in that. In that forum thread. I see one question in the live chat, which is relevant. Can different people work on the documents simultaneously? Will one update overwrite others? You can work on the same documents simultaneously, absolutely. The thing to do if you want to be sure that you're not clashing with other people's annotations is to update. To refresh the page in between each annotation. So you make a new annotation and then refresh the page. If you attempt to annotate something that has already been annotated, you will see that it's possible for two annotations to both exist on the same string. So if you annotate the string Persepolis and someone else annotates the string Persepolis, even if they're identical, there will be two annotations there. The other thing you can do is you can select someone else's annotation and you can add to it or change it or even delete it. I ask you not to delete it unless you think it's absolutely wrong and unrescuable and and probably someone taking the piss or something. But best not to delete it, but best maybe to add a comment to it explaining why you would interpret things differently. Okay, and so that sort of interaction I think can be useful. But there's no problem with having annotations on top of one another, and even something that you can't really do in HTML or XML is you can have overlapping annotations. Okay, so yeah, if you have a string, I don't know, the City of London streets, for example, one person might tag City of London, another person might tag London streets, and those two overlapping tags cause no problem at all with standoff markup in Recogito, but with markup in HTML or XML, that would actually be a problem with validation of those two overlapping tags. Is there anything you think we should add to that discussion of the second exercise, Christopher?
No, I think that all sounds great. And seem clear to me. And you know, the forums, or the issues forum, that is there for you to continue to use. Even for the Markdown exercise, we'll keep monitoring it for a bit. And yeah, just send us messages.
Do you want to talk about the further resources briefly, Christopher? I can share the screen.
Yeah, if you could share your screen.
So this way around.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my browser is saying I can't do it. Could you refresh that? I just added something.
Bing, bing.
There we go. Yeah, so I just added a video that briefly introduces XML and TEI, I hope in a succinct and informative way. And then we've just got some other resources for doing multilingual digital research, learning a bit more in depth about the text encoding initiative. And of course, with Gabby in the room, we would be remiss in not also mentioning Epidoc as another set of resources for encoding ancient documents. So Epidoc is a customization of TEI that's specifically geared toward ancient texts. And it's really helpful to know if you're working with ancient texts. And there are a lot of good online tutorials for Epidoc that we've made available. And then finally, well, one of the virtues of Markdown, as you probably noticed, is how nice it is to transcribe a document and get immediate presentational results, even if imperfect, in your preview pane or just directly as an HTML file. But a lot of people who are working in XML often want to know what it would look like once you've put in all of these semantic tags. And the answer is you need to process XML. And the way you process it is using a language called XSLT. We've included a link for a brief introduction to how to transform XML with XSL, which is something you'll want to learn more about if you're interested in going deeper into XML tagging.
It should be mentioned there are various tools that will transform XML for you, especially if you're using a standard language like TEI and Epidoc. Yep. That you don't necessarily have to have learned the XSLT yourself, although it's probably useful if you're making decisions about how to encode to have some understanding of how XSLT works. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Probably a good one to know about is called Oxgarage, which is on the TEI website. Mm-hmm. It has several style sheets built in with converters, and you just upload files and it exports transformed files. Another good tool to play around with is called TEI Publisher, which allows you to quickly demo XML as if it were published HTML. But there are several others too.
And if you're working with ancient texts or documentary texts, physical texts, and using Epidoc, then the standard transformation tool for that is called FS, which will create a whole sort of publication for you. It's similar to things like TEI Publisher in that it has a lot of the standard publication features that you would, but it has its own XSLT built in that you don't really need to dig in and know much about.
Right.
So as Christopher mentioned, the School of Advanced Study here at the University of London also offers training in more advanced XML and markup topics occasionally, including quite often training in Epidoc specifically for people who are interested in ancient inscriptions, papyri, and other documentary texts. So do keep an eye out for those in the usual channels. I guess in the same place that you saw this workshop circulated. And if there's anything in particular in the digital humanities area generally that you'd be interested in learning more about, please do feel free to get in touch and suggest something, or ask if we have anything, or we can recommend something else that you might go and look at. Partly for this reason, but also for the usual internal administrative reasons, we're also very keen to get formal feedback from you. So we'll be sending you a feedback form by email around the end of the workshop. And we'd be very happy for any comments that you had to make in that. Honest comments, of course, negative as well as positive.
We're experimenting after all, so it's good to know what works and what doesn't.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, then I look forward to seeing your discussions in the forums, and we'll be in touch with with both feedback forms and also a brief visualization based on your Recogito work. Yes, around the end of the workshop, which for the November 2020 contingent means the end of Monday. We have one more question, which might be worth addressing. The possibility of saving this course. So we won't be deleting any of these materials. Mm-hmm. If we run this course again, we will create a new wiki page for it rather than updating the existing one. So the page will stay the same. The videos will remain here on YouTube, so you can always come back to them anytime. Likewise, all the videos and materials we're linking to on the outline page should remain there. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to download the any videos from YouTube, there are some plugins you can get for your browsers that will enable you to rip videos down from YouTube. I guess YouTube probably don't want you to do that, so we maybe shouldn't be saying that on that platform. But that is something which is possible to do. But the videos won't be removed, so you can always go. Our videos won't be removed anyway. We can't guarantee other people's won't, but they'll be there, and you can keep using them.
Yeah, some of the videos too that were pre-recorded can be downloaded. So Panopto videos that I created, I believe those are downloadable. And Jonathan made one on Vimeo, which I think you can download. But you're free to do that, of course.
Worth noting as well that the any of the videos that we used that were originally from the Synokisis Digital Classics program, despite the fact that it's called Digital Classics, they're all relevant to digital humanities, no matter what discipline you're from, which includes the Recogito video we showed today, but possibly some others. Those are, in addition to being freely available, they're Creative Commons licensed. So if you do download them, or if you do follow them on YouTube, you're welcome to reuse them in other contexts. You're welcome to show them to students. You're welcome to take down parts of them and edit them together with other videos. You're welcome to download the slideshows from the that are made downloadable for those sessions and use them in your own slides, giving appropriate attribution, of course. But most of the most restrictive rules of copyright have been waived for those videos to make them more useful in pedagogical contexts. Yeah. Okay. So great. Thank you very much. And we'll look forward to chatting with you on the forums.
Thank you.
Bye.